All right. Hello to everybody that is tuning in tonight for another episode with the Coaches Corner. Our wonderful coaches are here loading in. While they do that and everyone is getting settled, just a couple words. Feel free to ask questions. Questions are encouraged. I will pass them over to the coaches as the show is running. And if for some reason we can't get to everything, head on over to the Coaches Corner and they will be sure to take good care of you there because they're amazing and wonderful. And so with that being said, I'm going to disappear and I'm passing this off to His Grace, Duke Eliahu, to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Coach's Corner. I'm Duke Eliahu from the Mid-Realm. With me tonight, Jarl Elenon from Atenveld and His Highness Sean from Artemisia. The subject tonight is the tell, specifically understanding and using the tell. And so, first of all, what is a tell? It's something that your opponent is telling you. It's a term we've adopted from card playing, essentially, but where there's a way of moving or talking or a nervous habit or some kind of thing that somebody does with their body that lets you know, in card playing anyway, if they're bluffing, if they've got a good hand, if they're revealing something about themselves that they don't really intend to. And if you watched Casino Royale, the James Bond movie, the first Daniel Craig James Bond movie, where he's playing cards with Le Chiffre, and he sees Le Chiffre's tell, but Le Chiffre is the bad guy, is feeding him the tell, and so it's a plot point. But so we'll talk about this in terms of fighting, of course, and coaching for fighting, and probably organizing our thoughts in terms of what does somebody tell you when they're just standing there, when they're static? What do they tell you by how they stand, how they hold themselves? And what do they tell you when they're moving? And then what some common tells are and how you can use those in your fighting. So comments, introductory comments.
Eliahu, you want to go first? You're muted.
I wanted to, hello everyone. I wanted to give an example, because I think cards is good, and that's certainly where the expression comes from, but something I think that more relates to what we do, a more physical kind of tell. Back in the 80s, when Andre Agassi, the professional tennis player, was coming on the scene, Boris Becker, the German tennis player, was just a powerhouse, a tremendous server, and a winner of Wimbledon and other prestigious tennis tournaments. And Andre Agassi had been beaten by him 3 times and just could not get a hold of his serve to get a good return. And it turns out Andre Agassi's career was made up on his ability to return. He was considered a strong returner, and he was struggling, and he just couldn't figure it out. The serve was so fast, and he's like, hey, I just need a fraction of a second to try to understand where this thing is coming. So he started doing video study of Boris Becker, and he studied and he studied. He's like, man, I don't have anything. Wait, what's that? And he noticed, and it was really subtle, because when Boris Becker was doing his serve, he'd stick his tongue out. And it's like, well, he's just sticking his tongue out. I mean, I know he's going to serve. There's nothing I can do about that. But he zoomed in and he noticed that he would stick his tongue and angle it either right in the center if he was coming down the center line, or if he was going for the baseline, his tongue would weirdly move just a little bit to the direction towards the base, to where he was going to serve it. And he picked up on that tell. He eventually wound up, I think he was 10-4 all time against Boris Becker. And the hardest thing he said wasn't figuring out the tell. It was then trying to realize you couldn't always act on the tell. If he did it every time, Boris Becker would figure something else out. And he had to wait until it was extremely important serves to actually react to the tell. So sometimes he just had to get burnt, and he had to let himself get burnt. But it was game winners or match winners, and things that were extremely important. And he wound up using that for years. And years later, over a beer, he couldn't help but tell him, and he said, "I figured this thing out." And Boris Becker was just like, "Oh my God, I cannot believe it. I used to tell my wife I thought you could read my mind." So this is what we mean, and we'll talk about over the course of this episode how to recognize both physical in the moment tells and also static tells that your opponent are going to, they're going to tell you a story before you've ever started fighting. It's up to you whether or not you want to start listening to that story. So yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, and that idea that I thought you could read my mind. Well, I don't have to read your mind if I can read your body, and your body is going to rat you out every time. There are things that we do that, and we have no idea that we're doing these things, and that's what we're looking for when we talk about the tell is, that information that your opponent is providing to you for free. In one of the first episodes we had Alan on, we were talking about, he's talking about the test, right? And the probe where, we put something out there to see how somebody responds, right? And that's some information that we get from our opponent as far as how they're reacting. But even before that, there's so much information that our opponents are just giving away, and they have no idea. And we're going to be talking about how to read that, how to pick up on those things, and what you can do with that information once your opponent has literally given it to you.
So the first place to start, really the first place I start, is looking at my opponent, and I look at their armor, I look at their weapons, and then see what that tells me. And years ago, I was sparring with a fellow, and a large fellow. I looked at him, and I could see that his sword, which was heavy and shorter than most of the damage was from the middle back to the hilt. Well, okay. And I could see where the damage was on his shield, and I knew. And even before the lay on, he was leaning forward. So I knew as soon as I said lay on, he was going to charge. So I was ready for that. Most people with his length of stride are used to being on their opponent in a couple of steps. And so my idea was, I'll move away and angle away so that he gets uncomfortable and he can't be right on me. And as soon as I did that, he didn't know what to do, and he was out of position because he was past where he usually was. And then I explained to him afterwards, I knew exactly what he was going to do. And it seems like mind reading, but his body was telling me what I needed to know. So you can tell a lot about somebody just by looking at them. I've certainly had it happen where I would look at somebody and then I must have nodded to myself, and after the fight, my opponent said that really threw me, because I figured you had figured something out, because you looked me over and then you nodded and then you fought. It's like, well, I didn't intend that to be an intimidation thing, but that was a tell. I had figured something out. So that was my tell.
I mean, one of the things that we're looking for, when we're talking about tells is, when we are looking at, especially when we're talking about what our opponent is doing to us and what is coming at you, right? When a blow is coming in at you, you basically need to account for two variables in your response. You need to know when, and you need to know where. If you know when somebody is going to throw, and you know where their general target quadrant is going to be, then it becomes very easy for you to account for whatever that blow is that's coming in. So as far as defense goes, and what people are throwing at you, if you can pick up on, if you can determine the when and the where, then that's all you need to figure out, right? And when we're talking about tells, generally speaking, your opponent is going to provide you one of those two variables. And it can be something as simple as, they look down at your leg and, they see that your leg is open. I fight with a relatively small shield. For me, it's 22 by 30 inches. My legs are pretty well exposed. And I get people all the time that they see that leg and they see it wide open, and their body language tells me that they've identified that that's a target. And it's going to be, it's not even as dramatic as looking straight at my leg and then firing at it. It's going to be a shift in their body weight. Maybe they'll shift a little more to their sword side, to be able to get to that. Maybe they'll like even drop their shoulder a little bit because it's going for the leg. So there's all these things that are happening in their body that if you kind of pay attention to that, you can pick up on that. And a lot of times when I pick up on the fact that somebody has identified specifically my leg, when I see that they've made a decision, they can't change that decision, right? And so I will actually then feed them information that validates their decision. And, now I've got them in a place where they wanted to throw that. And now I've convinced them that they really can throw that. And so now they have given me the where. And as soon as they, and then from there, you can kind of see that buildup happening. That's usually what happens in getting the when. You can kind of see them kind of building up, and their shoulders kind of tighten up, and they change their breath. Or, if you have a fighter that likes to bounce their sword, and then all of a sudden their sword stops, and then they fire, right? That's another kind of tell. That's going to tell you the when. So if you can kind of pick up on those subtle things that people are doing, and again, a lot of people, when they made a decision, they can't change that decision. And once they've decided that's what they're going to do, they're all in.
I've seen something similar with people who will circle their opponent and then slow down and stop and then lean, and they're coming in, because it's not part of a continuous movement. They have to stop and change their direction. It's a very similar sort of thing that they're doing.
I just want to jump into, as people are listening to us discuss these different tales and these different types of tales, this is one of the few things that you can work on without actually having to be fighting an opponent. You can learn so much about your future opponents and just fighters in general by watching fighting. It is very much something that I like to do. When I'm competing in an important tournament, or a tournament that I really want to do well in, I am watching the fights. I'm doing so in a relaxed as manner as possible, but I am watching, and I'm watching to see what tendencies or tales people are doing. And it's just one of the things, like everything else that that's been discussed probably on every episode of Coach's Corner. This is something that you can train to do. The ability to read a tale and then to know how to react to a tale is a learned thing. It's not something necessarily, I'm sure some people do so naturally, but it can be trained. And once you learn what a tale is, then you can start learning what reactions you want to do with them. So in each of these cases, almost everything we discuss is something you can practice working on and trying to understand. And this, I say, unlike certain other things that you can only practice in the middle of the combat, this is one you can work on from the side of the field and should be working on.
I tell my squires or fighting students to watch fights, and I will watch fights with them and see what they see and start to point out things to them so they'll see them. And for example, patterns. Some people use certain patterns of movement or sword blows, and that becomes very clear when you see it repeated. And observation from watching fighting is very valuable. It helps if if you don't know what you're looking at, to have somebody with you to point out what you can see there. So that's useful as well. A coach. A coach. How about that?
Coach.
Um,
I've learned a lot from watching fighting with other fighters, because they see things differently than me. And, as I've said before, I'm an unashamed and unabashed stick jock. And when I watch fighting, I'm enjoying watching fighting, and I am more than happy to talk about it with anyone within earshot. And if I don't have anyone within earshot, I'll go within earshot. So it's absolutely. So one of the ways I like to think about tells is I wrap that up into the larger sort of notion that every fighter is trying to tell you a story. And are you receptive to their story? And before they start swinging at you, they're telling you stories. We talked about, we're going to talk about static physical tells. The length of someone's sword, the damage on that sword, these tell you things. If someone's tip of their sword is all beat up, well, that happens because they're hitting with the tip of their sword. And it's telling you something. Whether or not you want to process it and use it, I guess that's on you. But as you progress as a good fighter, you are going to want to accept all the information you possibly can, process it as quickly as possible. And one of the ways that you're able to process things quickly is by practicing processing things quickly. It's all going to go back to practice all the time. If someone's got scuff marks on their helmet, it's telling you a story. So
I can tell you where they're not blocking.
Quite often, yeah.
And before every tournament, I repaint my shield and I retape my swords so as not to give that information away. I think you can also tell. You mentioned armor and weapons, but you can also tell. There are tells in the way people stand.
Yeah, absolutely.
In their stance and their arm position, their balance. Do they have a balanced stance? Can they move in any direction? Is their weight more forward or back? You can tell somebody's range is a combination. Range without movement is a combination of where their back foot is, where the length of their arm, their length of their weapon, what their reach is. And that's useful information, particularly if you want to be just outside their range, in and out of their range, so as to encourage them to move. Is their arm in? Is it forward? Is it back? And there are lots of different systems that people use in fighting that have different sword positions, but those sword positions tell you something about the most likely wear, as Sean said, the most likely wear of some attacks.
Well, in addition to all this, as far as where the sword is and when they're going to attack and that sort of stuff, reading body language tells you about the emotional state of your opponent as well, and the physical state of your opponent, where you can look at them when they look like their armor is hanging on them rather than them using their armor, when they just when they are exhausted, when they've kind of run out of gas, and you can kind of see their body language, you kind of see them slump a little bit. That again, that's more of that story. It's more giving you information. You can see in that moment where somebody unloads their best 10-shot combo on you, and you block it all, and then that was their whole game plan, and you can see him take a step back, and I can't believe he blocked all of that, and I don't have anything else. And you can see somebody's body language change. You can see their whole energy change in the fight. That is also going to give you all kinds of information that is going to help you manage your fight. So reading body language and reading how how people stand and, how they slump and, what do they look like when they first come onto the field, versus, when they've exhausted that 10 shot combo that was their whole game plan. What happens after that? And that tells you a lot about their emotional state. It tells you a lot about their mental state and their physical state as well.
What was the name of the Chicago running back? Was it Walter Payton?
Walter Payton was a Chicago running back.
So he had a thing that he did that no matter how hard he got hit, he would jump up as quickly as possible to not let them know if it hurt.
Yeah.
Because he did not want those linebackers and he did not want those defensive players to know when it was hurting. He always wanted them to think that he could not feel pain. And so that's a way of masking your body language. It's lying, and it's important. Sometimes it's important to lie.
Well, the other example of that is Jim Brown did the opposite. Jim Brown, who held the rushing record before Walter Payton. Jim Brown always took his sweet ass time getting up after he got hit. So people would always think that he was injured. So yeah, they like two sides of the same coin right there.
Yeah, and they're both extremely useful, I think. So an example of what you were talking about, the body language and stuff. A couple of years ago, in one of the 8 and Belt Crowns, I went up. One of the guys that I had been coaching was heading towards the finals, and I said, "Your opponent is gassed. Your opponent is gassed, and it's not really in this. It's not really in this fight, but this means it's yours to lose. What you will do yourself no favors if you just immediately get within range and try to finish this fight as quickly as possible." That's what he's begging. He is begging you for that. Do some range, do some patience, and you're going to take advantage of the fact that your opponent in this situation can't breathe and is having difficulty completing and finishing. So, because this particular person's natural inclination was, well, let's just go mix it up. And I'm like, wait, make this fight last, and I guarantee you'll win.
Yep.
Now we get to call him Your Excellency.
Patience is really important when you're talking about tells, because analyzing your opponent's tell takes time, and you also need to stay alive long enough to analyze that and then put that into action. And if you just rush in, you're often missing an opportunity because of your own lack of patience. So it's a very good point. Signs of fatigue, absolutely. You can see that in somebody. You can see, are they breathing from here? Are they holding the shoulders up? There's a number of signs of that. Is their head down? There's body language. People can read more and actually are more experienced reading body language than other people think. And it's another way of actually deceiving your opponent by, as the two examples you indicated, of both Walter Payton and Jim Brown. So I think that there are also certainly ways that people move are I'm sorry for the beeping. I've got a alert on there. So there's certain ways that people move that are also tells. And ultimately, it's the combination of their appearance, their body language, their stance, and their movement that give you a wide range of information that you can use. So, for example,
somebody really wants to talk to you.
Yeah, it's a messenger, and I don't know how to turn off the alert, so I'll have to work on that. Sorry about that. So, for example, and as an example, I saw someone who repeated a pattern. It was a tournament I was in. It was pool tournaments, pools to an elimination tournament, and every fight this fighter did the same thing. He'd attack straight in, step to his right, and throw a leg shot. Straight in, turn your head, step to the right, throw a leg shot. And he did that with every successive opponent. And I saw that before he did that step to the right, he was already leaning that way. So we went out to fight. Lay on, he throws the first shot, which I block. I see his lean, I know the leg shot's coming, and I immediately fired and caught him right in the sword arm. It was because he had already given that away. And what you're giving away with tells to your opponent, because other people are observing, if you repeat yourself and repeat patterns from one fight to the next, and within a fight, your next opponent is seeing that as well.
Did he tell you that you were just fast?
Yes.
Yep. Oh, you hit me because you're so fast.
Yeah.
I'm a lot faster when I have all the information I need to work with.
Yeah, I knew exactly where the target was going to be. So I wasn't aiming at where he was. I was aiming at where the target was going to be. Yeah. Because I knew it was going to be there, because he'd already told me with his body language that's what he was going to do.
I hear this every so often. Someone will say, you move faster backwards than I move faster forwards. And it's like, that's actually not true. It's, unless I was just a peak athlete, that's impossible. What I do is I process when you're about to step forward, and I've anticipated it, and I'm either in step or I'm slightly even ahead of you. But it's, and I've watched a number of good fights, and you'll see this really, I think you see it really well with certain glavesmen or glaves persons. They're able to keep the distance that they need, but it's so important to them that they've gotten so good at reading when someone is coming. And Duke Eliahu has already mentioned a couple of different ways people are giving you that tell, the lean forward, I've been fighting people before and said, hold, you're doing everything but shuffling your feet like a bull, telling me you're about to charge. A little more subtlety and you'll catch me.
Yeah, I always refer to it as it's like the Wile E. Coyote gearing up to chase the Roadrunner, like this whole thing right here. There's all that information. And a lot of that is, excitement and adrenaline, and, where they, there's all this buildup that happens when somebody is about to engage the fight, and when they're about to when they're about to launch their attack. Because I know some of, I try really hard to make sure that when I, the only decision that I've really made in the fight is the decision that I'm ready to engage the fight. And when I'm ready to engage, I'm just going to take a step into range and then see how it goes from there. But there's not really I was fighting a guy a couple of weeks ago, and, I stepped in, and, my whole body indicated that I was ready to fight. I was ready to engage, and he just completely backed off of the fight. He completely disengaged it, and we both had a pretty good laugh about it, because he could tell that something was coming, and you don't know what's coming, but you can tell that something's coming. And he'd asked me after, he's like, so what were you going to throw when that happened? And I said, I don't know. I didn't have a particular shot in mind that I was going to do, but I was in the fight. I was engaged, and my body language just declared that I am engaged. I'm ready to be part of this fight. Whatever happens, it's, I'm ready to get this thing going right now.
One of the things that I often look for is that reluctance to engage in the fight, that somebody is not sure, they're tentative, they'll approach, but there's an approach avoidance thing going on. One of the things that we often have to do with beginners, and often not beginners, one of the most common tells is is cocking the weapon instead of going from guard straight to the target, is cocking the weapon. And even when somebody's got it out here, if they move their shoulder in before they move the sword, they're little things like that. But certainly cocking the weapon back to go forward is one of those really, really common tells.
It's one of the reasons why we probably all try to coach our students into having a guard that allows their offense to flow from it, their defensive, so, I'll see guys and their hands will start dropping really low. And it's like, well, there's not a lot you can do with your hand down there, but definitely what you're doing is you're bringing it up to throw. So that's just an announcement every time. So put your hand in the, and if some people just need to generate a little bit of momentum to get a shot going. And it's like, well, if you have to, that's fine, but minimize it, and minimize it by putting your hand in as close to the position that you're going to strike as possible. It's best. And, people used to say it was impossible to throw a good shot from this guard. And, over the last 10, 12, 13 years, I think we've put that to rest, that it's absolutely possible to throw a good shot from that guard. But yes, back in ancient times when all the swords were deep back, on the shoulder or further, that's a lot of having to get the whipping motion going to try to get shots going. You don't see that as much anymore, but you still see it.
I donated the second rattan sword I ever made to the archives of the barony where I lived. And it was a big, fat, round stick with a big, fat, round handle. And getting it moving took a lot. My swords weigh a lot less than that now and are better shape. But yeah, and also one of the other things at play is that movement straight towards the eyes is harder for us to pick up than movement across our field of vision. So if you're raising your hand or moving sideways or something, it's easier. The human reaction to that is quicker than if something is moving straight to your eye. So consequently, I teach to move the sword straight. Everything goes forward. The body turns and it all goes forward. There's no rearward movement. There's no up or down movement to start, because that's easier to pick up. Any change of direction in the sword would come later, after their defense is already committed to a block, which is part of what Sean was talking about. You don't really know. I see people go into fights have it with a plan. It's like the 10 shots, the 10 shot combination. That's everything they've got. It's like dumping a bag of tools on a pile of wood and expecting a chair to happen. It doesn't. You have to use the right tools in the right order, in the right way to make something. And excuse me. So going in with a plan is another kind of tell. You can tell, you can detect when somebody has something in mind. And you can also detect when they only have a limited toolbox, and so they try the same thing over and over again, just harder, even though it's not working. And by doing it again and harder, they open themselves up in other ways.
Eli, let me go back to something that Eleanor was talking about, with the hand position and the guard. We're talking about some of that old school stuff way back here, and one of the things that I'd heard about early on, and I'm not sure if this is more Bellatrix or Oldcastle, but it was the sword down the spine, right? Mm-hmm. And the theory being that the first thing that happens is your hand goes up, and then it goes out from goes to wherever the target is from there. But the whole thing being, when your hand goes up, like everything starts the same, everything looks like it's the same, but that sort of thing. I mean, even with that's a pause, that's a moment. And when the hand goes up, there's motion there. The other big one that I see a lot is chicken winging,
Yeah.
People
Yep.
who got their sword up here and they got their elbow up on here, and they're going to crank down on that shoulder to start the shot. Well, all that effort, Eleanor was talking about, you have to have somewhere to generate that momentum from. You have to get the stick moving somehow. And, you're doing that chicken winging out there. And when you drop your arm down there, even if I don't know what shot you're throwing, I know, again, I get the when, and you give me the when, and then I can figure out the where from there. So these are all sort of things that we need to kind of keep in mind. So when we're talking about whatever your guard is, wherever your hand position is, your hand needs to be in a position where you can throw any of the basic shots.
Yeah.
And really, people want to talk about, give all sorts of names to 100 different shots that are out there, but when you boil it all down, you get right down to it. It basically comes down to shield side, sword side, backside. You've got a straight on side, you got an offside, and you've got a wrap, right? And your hand position, wherever that is, should be in a position where you can throw shield side, sword side, backside from that position. And again, if you're down here, and there's definitely there's the A-frame. I mean, Elena does it. Brannos is made it famous for sure. And yeah, you can absolutely fire pretty much any of those shots from there, right? But when your hand is down here, like down low, or when your stick is just out in front of you, or when when you got your stick right in here in front of your face, those are all things that I consider to be kind of defensively minded, offensive or positions. And that again is another tell. If somebody's got their sword in the front of their face and they're more concerned about using their sword to block their face, then that's all kinds of information that you can use to your advantage.
Then how the shield interacts, if somebody's using a shield, how the shield interacts with that as well is significant, because I've seen people who had to move their shield out of the way just to throw a simple straightforward blow.
Yep.
And this movement is a clear tell. Oh, they're moving their shield, they're going to throw something. And if there's a lag time between the moving of the shield and the starting of the shot, now there's this nice opening right down the center for my sword to go into.
Well, because you're fast.
Yeah. Yes. No. I'm like Jim Brown. I'm old and slow, right?
Every time.
One of the questions that we have says, I need to work on keeping people out of their range, and I'm trying to get better at retreating. Any tips that I can hear would be great. I've got a number of things that I use to try to manage range, and certainly understanding when my opponent is going to try to transition from outside of C into, quite often. And, I tell people all the time, you probably don't want to hang out at C with me. So you probably want to get to B and A, but the dangerous thing are those transitions. So what I do a lot to be able to manage that range, and one of the things that I ask other people to start thinking about doing, is just subtle feints as people start to make their move, make them move slightly slower. And with that allows you then to, if you want to maintain a C or greater range, then you can go ahead and start making your movement back. So someone starts to come to me, I do that. And just that motion right there slows them down. They have to go through a wall of force before they pick up their momentum. And the thing is that people don't even realize that they're slightly slower, so they think that they're coming at the same speed as always. But by offensively threatening someone is one of the ways that you can manage and maintain range. Other ways that you can manage and maintain range while being purely defensive, I think even is, again, more is an offensive technique. If I'm up like this and someone starts to come on me, I drop the tip towards their face, and that allows you time to go back to C or further. Very few people want to, want to kill themselves by running into your sword. So that's very similar to the fake, or a flick shot even, to try to manage range. But you can do lots of things. But the key first is that anticipation, because if you're not anticipating the charge, or they're transitioning from C to B, then you're kind of already behind on the count. And I always try to I want to stay even or ahead. Ideally you want to be ahead. You want to be the person who, even if you didn't throw the punch, you knew the punch was coming, so you're managing every aspect of it. Not, you're not just on the receiving end of it. So the same way, I try to anticipate that movement. You look for it. You look for, the things that Eli has said and Sean has said. People are trying to tell you a story. Listen to that. Learn to listen to that story. Learn to listen, that when they drop their shoulders, or they squat a little bit further or deeper than they would when they're just standing in their guard. But everyone kind of moves forward slightly differently, so you kind of have to learn all the different tells associated with someone wanting to do a hard transition from C to B or C to A. Practice learning them, and then practice putting them into effect and what you're going to do with it.
I'd say one of the other responses is, in addition to, it could be instead of, but it could be in addition to some of the defensive sword movement you're talking about, is footwork. Is don't just stand there and don't be where they are aiming their movement at. Diagonal movements, either an X pattern, either this way or that way, and circling around, and there's a lot of different ways to move. But the key thing is, if they are expecting their movement to reach you because of where you are, don't be there. Be in a different place. So, Sean?
Yeah, we're talking about manipulating range, right? Range is a three-dimensional concept. And a lot of times, obviously the best plan to avoid being hit is to not be there when the shot lands, right? And when we're talking about that, we're talking about evading a blow, right? Something I think a lot of people don't think about often is, when we think about evading, we think about it evading as just going straight backwards. And that is definitely an option, but we should also consider evading forward, evading through, taking a step on a 45 at, passing your opponent on either side. Basic principles of Aikido, right? When somebody wants that space, you just kind of void that out and let them have that space. You can take a step to the side, let them have that space, and then circle out to be able to have it. But you don't have to necessarily go straight back in a straight line. You can evade through, you can evade forward, and it's not a every time response, but it is definitely a response, and it's one that a lot of people don't think about because it's counterintuitive. If you don't want to be there when the blow lands, we think primarily about just leave, right? Like you said in True Grit, I'm usually going backwards when I'm backing away from somebody. But we can think about it as evading through as well, and we can manage that range. You don't have to necessarily step up into, and you don't want to camp out in a particular range, but you can use that step through to transition and kind of pivot off of somebody to be able to kind of get them to come through.
That's also offensively better. What the things that you're saying, Sean, that's, oftentimes I'll just bug out, and bug out allows me to keep fighting. But making someone miss and not having to give ground, or having stepped to better positioning as it's happening, that's ideal. And that is, that's someone's A game right there. And I love making someone miss when I don't have to actually move, because they're out of position because they missed, and I'm just right there. So, now, but I mean, I'm definitely a when in doubt, get out person. But the higher level of fighting is not having to always go backwards. Great
Um,
point, Sean.
we've mentioned several common tells, but I think it would be useful to describe to people what some others are. So, for example, if I see somebody sword and shield drop their sword and bring their drop their shield and bring their sword across to cover, and they do that in response to a certain kind of blow, either a leg or a head, or they'll, but this is their reaction. I know then if that's how they're going to react, I know I can use that by feinting that way and then just going for the arm or the offside or something, because they're leaving that all open. But that's one that I commonly see that one a lot. I'll see, particularly with larger shields, movement across to block a thrust, which is not the optimal way to block a thrust, and leaves all sorts of other targets open. So what are some other?
Well,
You mentioned several.
I'll go ahead and jump on that, because something I was thinking about earlier too is, we talk a lot about the tells for when somebody is about to strike, but there's also those tells for what that person has decided they want to defend, and how they set up their guard and how they set up their shield stance. When you find, you're fighting somebody. So I'll give an example of something that happened to me a number of years ago. I was fighting Lucan at Pennsic in 2002, and I was watching him just tearing everybody up with that offside body, right? And so I went out and fought him, and I'm like, all right, well, he's not going to hit me with that thing, right? So like I just shoved all my defense over to my offside, because I wasn't going to get hit with that thing. And, it turns out that he just stood there and hit me with a flat snap eight or nine times right in a row. Because, I had decided that I was going to block this one thing, and that was the one thing I'm not going to get hit with. And meanwhile, I just give him something that is just so much easier to get to anyway. I mean, basic flat snap is always easier than hitting an offside. So that's one of those hard lessons that I had to learn at some point was, if the guy's good enough to be able to hit that whenever he wants to, then I'm going to make him hit that. But I'm not going to give him something even easier to get to, because I'm trying to block this. But you see this happen all the time, where people are like, oh, this guy's got a really good leg wrap, or he's got a really good head wrap, or he's got this really good thing, and then people just like, they go to cover that thing that this person is known for. And well, that's a huge tell right there too. So it's not just what they're throwing and what their body is telling you about what they want to do to you. But man, when you start reading that sort of stuff, and when you got into somebody's head that bad, before the fight even starts, it's going to be a pretty miserable fight for one of you. And I can tell you, when Lucan did it to me, it absolutely was. And that was something I learned from, and I take that and like, hey, if you're going to beat me with your thing, then you're going to have to beat me legit. I'm not just going to give you something else.
If it's safe to talk, my dogs were going insane. Kind of a little follow-up. For the longest time, many years ago, I struggled against just Gareth LeBruin's Rising Snap, and it was such a good shot. He just had it down perfectly. And for those of you who have heard it, but at least my definition of a rising snap is you give some indication that your flat snap is going to be either leg or body, and then you bring it back up into the head. So, but it would drive me nuts. It's like, how am I losing to this? Just don't get hit by it. But it was just so good. It was just so fast. And your brain's always telling you, well, something else is coming. And so you start trying to defend something else, and then the shot would come back. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring up a rising snap is because, you know, it's what I learned to do to tell that, you know, the first part of the rising snap is that drop shoulder. So, you know, that's part of a shot. It's part of the feint associated with the shot. And it's also a tail if you decide to take it as a tail. And, you know, the only way I started getting any success against His Grace was by reading that tail and just not being there. Just not, you know, it was too fast and too hard to try to block. And, you know, because if you did block it and you were in range to block it, then, you know, it felt like it crushed you down. And then he came with a off body into your, you know, and that would hurt worse than getting hit in the head. So, you know, I just decided that the best way for me to deal with it was to read the tail when it was coming and not be there at all, not have to block it, not have to deal with it. But, you know, we all, when we first start learning to fight, these sort of basic feints that are also basic tails, you know, I think Eli already mentioned it. You know, a guy wanders up and he kind of looks down at your leg and he throws a shot. And, you know, that's the beginnings of learning how to throw fakes and feints. It's not particularly subtle anymore. And it really only works on new people or someone who really is worried about getting their legs blown up. But it is the beginning of learning how to try to do things. But like anything else, it's a tell. What do you do with it? A guy looks down at your leg. Well, you could accept that story that he's telling you. He's trying to tell you, I'm going to hit you in the leg. So don't just block the leg, block everything. He's telling you he's going to throw a shot for sure, you know? So make sure you've got that leg block. If you have to bring something else over to block the second shot, I always tell people all the time, block 2 shots and prepare for the third. You know, block the obvious shot that it looks like you're going to get hit with. What else would be the next thing? If you were throwing that as a fake, if it looks like it's a leg, what else? What's the next easiest shot? Well, bring it back up. Okay, so block both, block the entire side, and then be prepared for it to come over here. You know, so block 2 shots, be prepared for the third. That is, and you should start reading the tails. Then you're able to do those kinds of things. But if you're just reacting to the fight and you're not trying to process it a little more deeply, you know, you do what most people do. You block one thing and then get hit with something else.
Yeah, and this kind of gets into, you know, some of the things we can do to learn how to read tells, that sort of stuff. And, you know, as always, can't emphasize enough that practice is where we get better at the things that we suck at. Right. And so fighter practice is absolutely the time to do this sort of thing. And one of the ways that we can kind of start reading these sort of things is sort of you can take and sort of catalog the shots that are coming in at you. Right. And what you want to do is, as something comes in, you basically catalog it into, you know, up, down, left, right. Right. And then what you want to do is you want to kind of go back and look at that as like, what's the last thing I remember seeing before this person went upper left or upper right? You know, if he's hitting the offside, you know, was there that little bit of a turn in the hand to be able to get that offside, which happens a lot. People do that. They don't even know they're doing that. They'll be here, you know, be in even in the A-frame or wherever, and you see the hand turn just a little bit. And that's a dead giveaway that they're coming offside. So if you can kind of catalog those blows and just first off, cataloging blows gives you an understanding of where you're actually being hit. And when I say cataloging, I just mean up, down, left, right. You just catalog it into one of those 4 quadrants as far as where your opponent had thrown at you. Because a lot of times when we get hit, we don't know, like we just know that I got hit, but you may not even know where. So cataloging blows kind of helps you kind of get back to point of origin. It gets you back to, it gets into blow recognition and what's coming at you and how to identify things better coming at you. But you can, you know, fight people and like let them throw, right? Let them give you the tell, let them, you know, see what their body language gives you, and then let them throw. Don't be too concerned about you know, I mean, first of all, let's get rid of the idea of winning and losing at practice, right? We're going to be going into that into a different episode coming up. But when you get kind of let go of the wins and losses, it makes it a lot easier for you to just watch and observe at practice. Like, what is this guy doing? What does this body language mean? Right? When these little things happen and when the shift of energy and the shift of weight happens, you know, and then you start to kind of be able to predict. It's like, okay, last time he shifted like this, he ended up throwing here. So is he going to do that again? Okay, yeah, he did. He shifted his weight this way or returned this way and did the same sort of stuff. So that's some of the stuff you can do at practice to be able to practice reading body language and just seeing how accurate you are in that, in just trying to read how people work.
We had a question about, did we address this other than a change in body language that somebody's going to charge? What are other tells that they're coming? And it's well, body language is not just the lean or the stance. There's foot position, there's the hand position, as Sean mentioned. There's also pace. So I've seen people circle before, and then they're circling, and you know, straight out of I don't know, posing movie, whatever,
Kung fu movies,
yeah, kung fu movie, and then they'll stop and they'll slow down and they'll get ready, and then the lean starts, and then so there's a lot, the timing of it also is some a tell that they're going to charge in. My friend, the puissant Count Valerius from North Shield, moves. He does this better than anyone else I've seen. He will move in. He'll be at C range, but he'll move in on a spiral so that before he realizes, his opponent realizes it, he's in on them, and then he will spiral out again. So he has this beautiful circular movement in and out. And so he can change that range without clearly, obviously charging in on somebody. So we mentioned that what we read from our opponent, but Elenon mentioned how we're also feeding them information. And I think that there are, very broadly speaking, two schools of how not to reveal your tells inadvertently to your opponent. And one is to use, since the tell is from cards, use what's known as poker face. You're always looking the same. You're not giving away any information obviously in an intentional way. Another way is also from poker. I've seen people keep up a constant chatter, so their tells are hidden. So Duke Stephen Beckenham, he's constantly changing position, stance, moving, and hiding his tells, he thinks, in his movement. And for the most part, he is. So those are roughly two ways of approaching hiding your own tells, because beyond the very basic look at someone's leg and hit them in the head is, and you notice how we all do this when we're talking about fighting, but there are other things that can mislead somebody by showing them something that you're intending them to read as a tell, but isn't, because you're intentionally feeding it to them. Like did I mention the movie Casino Royale? When yeah. So that occurs in there too. So
Elenon, do you have any particular tells you want to let us know about that you have? I know I've got mine.
Well, the first thing I've got to do is pass along this note that my wife gave me because I mispronounced tail. That's maybe a Southernism on my part, but I'll try to say tail rather than
Good.
tail.
It's comforting to know that the wife watches the show, though, right?
Maybe she was trying to herd these dogs when they were going crazy a few minutes ago. So I try to also create a lot of fake noise. I talk about noise a lot in my fighting. It's I'm just trying to create some kind of feedback, and I want my opponents to pay attention to something that's probably could also be a tail. So if I stick my hand up high and start moving it around, I am both trying to get you to react to it, look at it, whatever. But the odds are really good. I'm going to throw a shot fairly soon after that. Because I'm just trying to see if you're paying attention to it. And if I think you're paying attention to it, well, then I'll throw a shot from it. But almost anything I do at C range, any kind of movement, any kind of slow, whatever, they're all setups to try to throw something. And, I tell people all the time that when I'm fighting, they're like, well, what can I do? I seem like I die by that all the time. It's like, well, if I start doing that, you can either make your transition and try to get in or step out. But I can't hit you if you're not in range, or I also don't do a particularly good job of hitting people when they're swinging at me. So, so really any movement or anything that I'm doing and I'm slightly outside of C, the odds are good. I'm telling you, I'm about to reach inside and see if I can hit you. That's the first one I can think of. Her Grace Araya said she saw one a couple of weeks back. And I'm trying to, something I did with my footwork, and I'll try to see if I can remember what it was that she said. I can only remember thinking afterwards, it's like, well, were you able to do anything with it? Or is it you just noticed something? Because, one of the things about tells is sometimes it's information you can't do anything with. If the person, even if they do something right before they move, as long as if you can't capitalize on it, it might not be good information. The odds are, though, you just haven't figured out how to capitalize on it yet, and keep going back to the well and figure things out. So I was a little defensive when she told me that, and I'm like, don't be defensive. Figure it out and make sure you're not doing something that's going to get you hit.
Yeah, and that's one of the important things to understand about the tells that we have and that we are presenting to people is, first off, we all do it. Some of us hide it better than others. And to Alanon's point, even if you see my tell, you might not be able to do anything about it. But we all do it. That's the way the subconscious mind works. We do these things that are habit, that we don't necessarily know are happening, with like the example with Boris Becker there, he may know that he, sticks his tongue out. That might just be something that, maybe somebody made fun of him at, because he sticks his tongue out and he says, yeah, that's just what I do, without realizing that left, right, and center, that's something he's picked up on. Somebody that good, not knowing how much of a tell and what it is. So it's out there. We all do it. Doesn't matter how good the fighter is. And the longer we've been fighting, the more time we've had to ingrain those habits, and to just let them be part of who we are. I'll tell you, my biggest tell is not so much in a particular shot or where that shot is going as much as the when. My biggest tell is when I have decided that I am ready to engage the fight. Maybe I've seen something in their stance or or the way they've responded to certain stimulus. And in the beginning of a fight, when we first call lay on, I might be in a fairly forward, largely defensive position, right? Because especially if I'm fighting somebody who's got speed, I kind of want to be in a position where I want to kind of shut things down before they get a chance to get started. And in that first few seconds of the fight, I'm evaluating what's happening, and once I've decided that basically that my opponent has given me the opportunity to engage the fight, right? Once I see maybe that they're settled enough in their defense, or that they're not just launching their attack at me, right? Once I've noticed that they are willing, I guess it's that when I see that they are willing to accept the fight, they have told me that they're ready for me to engage. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And when that happens, when I recognize that they're ready to they have conceded themselves to the fact that I'm leading the fight. And usually when that happens, I'll go from a very forward stance. I'll pull back. I'll stand up straight. A lot of times I'll take my shield and I do this thing where I just kind of flare my shield back and then set back up in. And that is me like settling in, like, all right, crack the neck and, crack the knuckle. Like, all right, let's do this thing. That's me deciding that I am taking the initiative, that I have, that I have that upper hand, that I can take that initiative with minimal risk. And so, yeah, it's this thing I do once I've decided. And again, the example I had earlier when I was fighting, one of our novice fighters, they're like, well, what were you going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know that I'm ready to fight. Right. And once we get this fight started, then the onboard computer is going to take over and it's going to do what it needs to do. But step number one in that is me being engaged and me being ready to like throw down. And I do. It's this thing I do where I'm like, okay, I'm checking things out. I was like, all right, we've got this. And I'm just, and then engage.
I've seen a number of fighters who do something similar. They settle in and they're ready. As soon as I see my opponent do that, I move.
Yep.
As soon as I change things, because I want to keep them from not having it figured out. So I'll change up something.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I do is that the blow you see me start to throw is not the blow I'm throwing. It's going somewhere else. Almost, not all the time, but a lot of times, so that I'm throwing it with the intention that you're going to try to block it and I'm going to go somewhere else with it. And if you don't block it, I'm going to finish it. So that's one of the things I do. And we had a question about whether everyone has tendencies to react to specific probing actions, or some people don't. And I'd say that you don't know how somebody's going to respond, or to what probing actions they're going to respond, what their tendencies are, until you test them in that fight. You may see somebody do something in a previous fight, but they're approaching this fight differently. If you go into a fight with a plan, I know they always react this way to a certain thing, you're setting yourself up. So everybody will react in certain ways, but you don't know how they're going to react until you test that in the fight, and you test that in the fight while staying covered, staying alive long enough to use that information then to capitalize that on that in the fight. So everybody's got something, you just don't know what it is until you're in the fight and analyze it as you're going.
That's a great point, Eli. And I absolutely will still do probes against people whom I may have just seen them and I have a good idea of how they're doing it, but every day is different and every fight is different. So I want all the new information, and I want I want the newest, latest information and data associated with my opponent. So I'm still going to do the probes, and I'm still going to try to test, and I'm still going to try to understand this fight, this story. How does this story play out? And, you know,
It's
based
like
on
the
that,
it's like the make your own ending. It's the make your own ending book, right?
right. I mean, and some of the testing, while to try to understand what my opponent's tendencies are, also some of the probes that you can do, you can get information about yourself too. You know, maybe I don't feel like certain shots are on, because not, you know, you can have the body is a dynamic living organism. Not every shot is 100% at all times. So, you know, sometimes in the probing, I'll be trying to find out information about my opponent, but I also might have told myself, you know what, my knees don't feel great today. I don't know that I'm going to want to move like XYZ. I'm going to stick to certain other things. So I didn't just probe them, I probed me. But it is important to do these probes every time, every fight, because they're all different. And to get the freshest, newest data is giving you yourself the best opportunity to, you know, figure out the fight and go from there.
And when keep in mind that while you're probing your opponent, they're probing you as well. And one thing to keep in mind is that if you react in a certain way to a specific thing, let's say somebody throws a blow and you bring your sword over like this to cover, are you going to, if you do that again, they know, they've already seen that, they've already filed that away if you're fighting somebody who's really good. So while you're probing your opponent, they're probing you as well. So keep in mind that if you present the same response to their probe each time, you now have a tell that you're giving them a reactive tell. I guess you could say there's active and reactive tells. You've got a reactive tell. What are you doing? And it helps to have people, your coaches, your trainers, watch you fight to see if you're giving away things, if you're doing certain things. Are you cocking your sword before you throw? Are you shifting your weight? Are you leaning? Are you doing stuff? Are you blocking a certain way? That's a tell. What are you doing? And keep that in mind when you're fighting. If you respond the same way to something more than once, more than twice, the likelihood is that your opponent's trying to figure out how to use that against you.
Well, this is why it's equally important to understand not just what your opponent is telling you, but what you're telling your opponent. And it's important to understand what your, like, to know what your body looks like when you do certain things, which also partially leads to into the fakes too, right? Having an understanding of what your body looks like when you throw a flat snap is a key to being able to get somebody to believe that you're throwing a flat snap and then going somewhere else. That's why the rising snap works, right? What does my body look like when I throw a leg snap, right? So I want to mimic that as much as possible to get my opponent to believe that that's what I'm doing and change it up and up into that rising snap. So yeah, being able to understand what your body looks like and what information you're providing your opponent is absolutely critical to preventing somebody from either preventing them from capitalizing on your tells or, like Eleanor's saying, to like lie to them, it's like, oh, well, he has this tell and every time he does this, then this happens. Okay, well, let me give you that tell, let me give you just that portion of it and let you respond to that. And really, for my money, there's no better way to do that than watch yourself on video. Get yourself some videotape and watch what you're doing, and that's why it's important when you're looking at video. I'm a big proponent of using video to isolate your own deficiencies and to make yourself better. Because to Elena's point about having the most current information, it's like I can't go into a tournament and fight somebody based on video from them from 6 months ago, right? That's outdated information. The only information that is relevant is the information that has happened to me right in front of me. You can't make your opponent a worse fighter. You can only make yourself a better fighter. and using video to look at your fight and to see what's going on and to see these little things that you do that you have no idea you're doing. You have no idea these things are happening. You watch them on video. And one of the things I love about doing a video review with people is when I point out something and they say, well, I don't do that. Well, here it is on here you are on film doing exactly the thing you say you're not doing. So get yourself some video and start to get an understanding of what your body does and the information that you're giving away to people. Ellen, do you have something else on that?
No, I think that covers it. That's good.
Just to follow up on something you said, Sean, about when I'm teaching people how to throw a feint, I start with them making sure that they're throwing the shot, like the leg shot or the head shot, correctly in an effective way, and then have them feel where the point of commitment is, where it's going to continue there, and where they can, how far out they can push that point of commitment and still change the direction of the blow. Are they committing with their body? Are they committing with the sword? How are they doing that? And then change the direction so that they can develop the sense in their body of how it feels, so that they can then start to do that. And yeah, they have to, how do you throw the actual shot correctly? That's the key to then being able to throw a convincing feint.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. I tell people that your fakes, I mean, the lie is, I'm going to hit you offside. But a great liar convinces you that they're going to hit you offside, and that's what the body does the convincing. A new person might buy, if I stick my hand up, if I do this, they might buy that. But if I bend my knees and come over like that, that's what an offside looks like. When you put your knees and your shoulders into the feint and allow your body to be part of the grand lie, then you're going to get it potentially bought a little bit more. And against the higher level fighters, they're not interested at all in the little lie where you just do this. That little lie's, they're like, I don't care. You're not throwing, that's not a shot. I'm not interested in that. Do something that looks like a shot and I'll react to that. So absolutely, Eli, that's, the key to being a good liar, or to use your tales in a way that are going to take advantage of someone else. The misinformation is, you got to be good at it. You got to be convincing with every aspect of it. And it boils down to, does it look like an actual shot?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about how somebody is set up in their defense and in their guard because they want to cover a particular thing because they think you're going in a certain spot, right? If I find somebody is like blocking the offside really hard because they just know that I'm going to go to the offside, like that's the information they're giving me. It's like, okay, you have convinced yourself that I'm going to the offside, so let me reinforce your decision-making process. Let me show you how right you are. And then, so I'll give him more information. And a lot of times what happens, you get people like blocking way over here like this, you give that little motion to the offside and they go even further over that way, because they're like, oh, I gotta be ready for it. Oh, here it comes. And they just, they go whole hog at it and like much further than they would need to account for a legitimate strike on that way. And, when they do that, again, they're giving you this information and you're like, okay, well, let me go ahead and give you some information back that just, let me give you a little confirmation bias on that. And now I get to hit you wherever you open up. And it's going to be a whole lot easier because all your shit's over there.
Yeah. So when I see somebody's belly open, I don't hit them in the belly. I mean, they kind of know their belly's open. It's a part of their guard, but it is absolutely part of my fake routine. If I see a leg open, I might strike at it, and I might strike at it, not worry whether or not I hit it. But they know that leg's open a little bit too, so they're going to react to it, and then that sets up for on the other side. I think about, again, you want to try to look at what your opponent's giving you, but don't necessarily take it. I tell people all the time, when I'm training with them, like, if you see a little something, now that's interesting. There's a little opening in the head, or in some aspect of the movement of things, that I did probing, I see where it's open for a little bit. How do I open it more? I think that is going to give you more success than hitting an open shot. It is really hard to hit an open shot. Just walk in, lay on, hit the open shot. People know what's open, so see a little something open, make it more open, and then hit it.
Yeah, sometimes that open shot is bait.
Yeah.
And a really good fighter will leave, as Sean mentioned this, he knows his leg is open. He leaves it open. He leaves it out there, essentially saying to his opponent, yeah, just try to hit me in the leg. Come on.
Take your best shot, champ.
Easy. It's easy.
That offside leg is a dangerous thing too, because if you don't connect on someone's offside leg, you're out of position.
Yeah.
Well, you have to have an exit strategy for everything you do, for every action you take. You have to have a recovery and an exit strategy. So if you're attacking the offside, and it doesn't work, even if it works, you don't stand there and pose with it. If it doesn't work, you have to have a way to recover from that and somewhere else to go, because otherwise you're hanging out there.
Well, that's why I don't teach the offside leg as a basic mechanic, because it's not a basic mechanic and there's too much risk and not enough reward.
Yeah.
Did we get to every question?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah. So we got a few minutes here before we wrap up, but we want to get some final thoughts.
Yeah, I would go ahead.
Well, yeah, I guess I'll start. Like I said, we all do this. This is part of the game. This is the sort of thing that makes people think that we're really fast. It's not that, hand speed is important, but it's not nearly as important as processing speed. And reading the tells, reading the body language is much more part of the processing speed. Is the part of the decision making process that we go through in the shots that we throw, and the shots that we don't throw. Taking it's all information. It would be oversimplifying this to say, and as we often do, right? What do we always say about fighting? You hit the guy and with an inch and a quarter rattan, and you don't let them hit you, right? It's that simple. It's that simple and it's that complicated. But the information that your opponent is giving away for free is hugely important, and it will help you along the way in understanding the fight. Really understanding, comprehending the fight in totality, not just can I deliver this shot from my shoulder to the target faster than this guy can block it. Because if I can hit him at a time when his shield is either not in the way or is moving away from the target I want to be firing at, then yeah, it makes us look like we're that much faster. And it's all processing speed. It's all reading, and like I said, your opponent is giving you this information. So take that information, use it to your advantage. Be wary of the information that you are providing to your opponent as well, and do your best to, like to Elonon's point, kind of mitigate that and kind of manipulate the fight with what you're telling them, what you want them to believe, and what they're telling you as well. So,
Elonon?
Well, I'll kind of end with what I started with. This is a learned trait. Observation skills are things that you can practice. They're things that you should be practicing. They're things you can practice when you're injured. There are things when you can practice when I don't feel like fighting today. Okay, go to practice and watch fighting. Go specifically to go see what you can see. What are people telling you? Start learning how to do that. You can be an engaged fighter and not have to be fighting. Be a thinking fighter and something you can work on. So practice this the same way you practice everything else. Watch, talk with your buddies about it. Hey, did you just see what I just saw? Or what's going on there? Ask these questions during fighting. Lead the discussion during fighting. Have a great time doing it, and try to take away things from it. The first thing is the observation. That's the first thing. And do you see what people are saying? Are you able to pick up on it? The slower thing will be learning how to react to it in real time. But that's something you'll practice too. But the first thing you got to work on is just the plain ask, can you see what's going on? And the best way to do that is go look and talk about it with your fighter friends, your fighter buddies, your coach. And I look forward to seeing everyone put some of this into practice and take my tails and beat me up with them.
Exactly.
So I agree that observation and analysis is a learned skill and practiced. It helps you have someone point these things out to you so you can start to see them. It helps to have a coach to help you with this. I encourage you to watch the monthly video analysis that we have here, because some of that will become apparent, although it's harder to see sometimes on video, depending on the quality of video, some of the tells that are more subtle, because even just tells can be big, but they can be just somebody's foot position, or a change in the angle of the hand or something that, so tells can be subtle too. And it comes with experience, but also good coaching. So somebody points out to you what you're actually looking at. But this aspect of what we do, of reading people, is really one of the most fun parts for me of this. It's not just about faster, harder. I've never been the biggest, strongest, fastest guy, but it's processing speed. It's being able to read people and figure that out. And then you have to have practiced your blows and your movement to be able to take advantage of that, but you have to see it first. So it all works together, and it's a lot of fun to do. So
it is.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, we got a couple of housekeeping items. We'll bring Vesper on, as always, to offer our thanks to she who keeps us rolling week in and week out, hosting the live broadcast and whatnot. So we appreciate everything you're doing, as always.
Thank you. It was wonderful having me.
So next week on the Coach's Corner, we've got a very special episode. We're going to be live from Ontier. So Rifkin, one of our coaches, is going to be we're having a fighter practice up there. And in place of another event that wasn't able to kick off due to the COVIDs. We're all going to be as careful as we can and try to get some fights in. So same time Friday night, I guess that's 7 Eastern, 5 Pacific. We're going to be live from Sir Rifkin's living room, and we're going to be taking questions from live audience and talking about the fights on the day, and just entertaining whatever's going on. But we're going to have myself, Rifkin, and Brannos, who does a lot of our admin stuff. She's going to be joining us as well. So we figured, since we had a few of our coaches right there in one place, we'd go ahead and do live audience. So we're really looking forward to that. Should be a lot of fun. And before we let you go, I also want to officially welcome our newest coach who's joined us tonight, is Grace Alanon. If you think saying it is hard, try pronouncing it, or try spelling it. It's even worse. Al-Anon has joined us for a number of episodes over the last year and a half, and we've asked him to join us full time as one of our coaches, and we really appreciate his input all the time. And just want to say welcome and let everybody know that he's part of the team now.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure.
It's great.
Happy to have you, brother. All righty, Eli, I think that's all we got.
I think that's it. So thank you, everybody. If you have any additional questions, please post them on Coach's Corner on Facebook, and we will respond. So until next week, thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a good week.
Have a good night, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. Bye.
Good night.